So it's this really massive chunk of ice sitting on top of what is today the Great Lakes. And now there are some people who suspect it may have melted in as short a period as 8 years. And it's why there's the St. Lawrence River. All that fresh water suddenly had to go somewhere, and it literally cut a straight line to the Atlantic Ocean in the form of the St. Lawrence River. And when it did that, all that fresh water catastrophically ended up in the North Atlantic. Now there's a giant underwater river in the Atlantic of hot water, and it flows from the equator to the North Atlantic, and it surfaces pretty close to Iceland. And when it surfaces, it heats the atmosphere. So think about this. Cairo, Egypt, is right about north-south, right about where Austin is. We're about as far north as Cairo, Egypt is. Rome, Italy, is about as far north as New York City. When I think of Rome, I don't think of a city anywhere near as cold as New York City. Right? Berlin is about where Winnipeg, Canada, is. Stockholm is about where Anchorage, Alaska is. Europe is remarkably warmer than North America because of this hot water current that comes to the surface in the North Atlantic, and it makes Europe this pretty balmy, fun place to be in. And all of a sudden, all that cold water from the Laurentian Ice Sheet catastrophic melt dumps into the North Atlantic. It turned off that hot water current and froze Europe. It just froze it. Massive ice sheet formed over the top of Scandinavia and Britain, and the population of people that were living there literally had to run south. And we now know, because of genetics have become so fun, that the men in Europe abandoned the place and poured into what is today Iraq. And probably there were so many that it forced the population in Iraq to adapt. They had to increase the caloric output of the land they were using. And so they had to switch from gathering and hunting to agriculture to sustain this massive refugee problem of Europeans pouring into Syria and Iraq. How obnoxious. The really crazy thing is, it resulted in the world's, probably one of the world's first ever cities, and it was a really large city because the women who got left behind by those deadbeat dads had to figure out how to survive. And historically, most cultures, most gathering and hunting cultures, the men do the hunting, the women do the gathering. You're in the middle of an ice age, there aren't a lot of plants to gather. So all of a sudden, the women that were left behind had to switch over to hunting because that was the only food available, right? They needed to switch over to meat. And so instead of remaining scattered, they actually went into what is today the Czech Republic, and they founded a large town, and they began working together in this cooperative to help each other hunt so that they could raise their families in this massive cooperative. Eventually, though, and this is centuries later, men start to migrate back out of the Middle East and into Europe. And so if you're a European, this is fun, you have a huge genetic stock that's down your mother's line that's actually native European, and then your father's line is probably mostly Mesopotamian, just to make things really confusing.